The curves panel in Camera Raw is one of the most powerful tools that you can use to continue to adjust tonality, contrast, exposure, and color. After you have finished making your basic adjustments in the basic panel and you went to the optics panel, you always want to make sure that you use profile corrections to correct any issues that your images may have in, or that your camera may have in the lens. You're going to want to go forward to open up the drop-down menu in the curves panel. The curves panel is arranged. It gives you a few commands under the adjust command. You have several options to be able to continue to adjust color, tonality, and contrast in your images. What you see here is going to be a grid that represents the changes that are made to the tonal scale of an image. Down at the bottom, the horizontal axis represents the original tone values of the image, the input values, with black being on the left hand side, and it will progressively get lighter as you go towards the right. The vertical axis here represents the change tone values, the output values, with black on the bottom and progressively getting lighter or whiter towards the top. If a point on the curve moves up, the output is a lighter tone. If a point on the curve moves down, the output will be a darker tone. So the way you make points when you're in the parametric, actually in any of the commands under adjust, you want to place a point right in the center where two lines meet of the grid. So in this case, if you drag this point up, your image will get lighter. If you drag this point down, your image will get darker. And you can see down here at the bottom sliders, you can see the changes made. But you really don't want to be using sliders in the parametric curve because you have so much more power and control once you bring this over to the point curve. So before I do that, if you made any changes, you could zero out the changes that you made here to bring it back to its default. And you're going to go over to the next option, which is edit the point curve. When you see this, the first point curve that you're going to see is what's going to be changing your exposure and contrast. So if you head over to the center where the two lines meet and you click in the center, you could drag up again to make your image lighter, or you could drag to make your image darker. As you can see, I always follow the guides of the graph to make sure that I'm not confusing myself with the tonality. It's a lot easier to follow. If I want to get rid of this point, I just click on it, it turns solid, and you delete it. One of the things that I usually follow is that when I do make a point here, I don't drag up or down with my mouse. I usually use my arrow keys because that allows me to fine-tune without going too far to making it too light or too dark. So that's how you increase or decrease exposure. Another thing that you could do in the point curve is control contrast. So if I place one point in the center where these two lines meet of the graph, and I place another point towards the top where the two lines meet, if I go all the way to the top, I get pure white. If I go all the way to the bottom, I get pure black. But I want to place these points where I'm going to get on the lower left-hand corner, I place a point in the lower quadrant to be able to control my darks where I still have detail. It's not pure dark or black, it's where I still have detail. It's the same with this point here. It's a highlight where I still have detail because I'm not going to want to move it from up here because that's pure white. This middle point is going to correspond to midtones. So if I wanted to increase contrast with this image, I would click on the top point and I would slightly move up, and I would click on the bottom point and slightly move down. So what this does is that this corresponds to my darks. I made my darks darker. The point here corresponds to the highlights or the whites, and I just made that lighter. If you, again, want to see the before and after, you can see here, and I'm going to zoom in and move around to show you a highlight. You can clearly see that the contrast here has been increased. This is the after. Before, it's a bit softer. You don't ever want to get too out of hand with contrast because your image might wind up overly processed and it would look artificial. So to do the opposite, to decrease contrast, this right now is a slight S-curve. When you want to decrease contrast, you do the opposite. You raise up your darks to make your black, your shadow area with detail brighter. You click on your highlight area and you bring this down. So this becomes an inverted S. So again, if I go to an area like the bread, you can clearly see that the contrast has changed, but you control the amount of contrast. It's not like you're using a slider. You control the fine tuning of your, let's say this is a shadow area, I can make it a little darker. I can make this not quite so bright. So you have full control of the way your contrast would look when you're using the tone curve panel, what it was called before the update. Now it's just called